The clock on the wall of the Westlake Corporate Center showed 8 p.m. when the elevator doors opened on the executive floor. Michael stepped out, pushing his cleaning cart ahead of him. The hallway lights were dimmed to save energy, but he could see a few offices still lit at the far end. It was always the same. Most people rushed home at 5, but a handful stayed late into the evening. Michael had been working the night shift as a custodian at this office building for just over 3 years now. At 34, he had settled into the rhythm of this job. The pay wasn't great, but it was steady, and the schedule let him take classes during the day at the community college. The office building had its own personality at night. During the day, it buzzed with people rushing around, phones ringing, and the constant tap of keyboards. But at night, it transformed into something else, a quiet, almost peaceful place. Michael actually preferred it this way. No one watching. Over his shoulder, no crowds to navigate. Just him, his cleaning cart, and the empty offices. He started his usual route, emptying trash bins in the break room first, then working his way down the main hallway. He wiped down counters, dusted shelves, and vacuumed carpets with a practiced efficiency. After 3 years, he could probably do this job with his eyes closed. When he reached the eastern wing of the building, he noticed the light still on in Office 507. That was Dr. Olivia Reed's office. She was one of the research directors and often stayed late. Michael had cleaned around her many times before. Dr. Reed was different from most of the executives. She never acted like he was invisible. She would look up from her computer when he entered, give a small nod of acknowledgement, sometimes even a hello or good evening. It wasn't much, but in a place where most people looked through him like he was made of glass, it stood out. Tonight, he could see her through the glass wall of her office. She was standing at a whiteboard covered in diagrams and equations, tapping, a marker against her chin. Her dark hair was pulled back in a messy bun, and her normally crisp blazer was draped over the back of her chair. Michael knocked gently on the doorframe. "Evening, Dr. Reed. Just need to empty your trash and vacuum a bit, if that's okay." She turned around, looking slightly startled, like she'd been lost in her thoughts. "Oh yes, of course, come in." She glanced at the clock and seemed surprised by the time. "I didn't realize it was so late." Michael moved efficiently around the edges of her office, emptying the small trash can beside her desk. As usual, it was overflowing with crumpled papers and empty coffee cups. As he worked, he couldn't help noticing the chaos on her desk, papers scattered everywhere, folders stacked haphazardly, sticky notes attached to nearly every surface. Dr. Reed had turned back to her whiteboard, lost again in whatever problem she was trying to solve. Michael finished with the trash and moved to the vacuum cleaner. He knew from experience that the noise bothered people when they were thinking, so he decided to save that for last. Instead, he took a moment to straighten up the pile of papers that had fallen to the floor beside her desk. It was part of his job to make the offices presentable, and leaving papers on the floor seemed unprofessional. As he gathered them, he noticed they were full of complex diagrams and technical notes. Something about energy efficiency and building design. He could make out that much. Before working here, Michael had started studying engineering at the State University. He'd completed 2 years before financial reality had forced him to drop out. His mother had gotten sick and the medical bills had eaten through what little savings they had. He'd taken this custodial job thinking it would be temporary. But 3 years had passed and here he was, still pushing the same cart down the same hallways. But he hadn't given up on his dreams completely. He was taking night classes now, slowly, working toward an associate's degree. Maybe someday he could go back and finish what he'd started. He carefully stacked the fallen papers on the corner of Dr. Reed's desk, trying not to disturb her other work. As he did, he instinctively organized them a bit, putting related diagrams together. It wasn't much, but it might make her morning a little easier. "You don't have to do that," Dr. Reed said suddenly, making him jump a little. She had turned from her whiteboard and was watching him. "Sorry," Michael said quickly, stepping back from her desk. "Just trying to get them off the floor." No, she said, waving a hand. "I didn't mean to sound... I appreciate it, actually. This place is a mess." She looked around her office with a small, tired smile. I'm not very good at organizing. It's no problem, Michael replied, relaxing a bit. Part of the job. Dr. Reed nodded and turned back to her whiteboard. Michael took that as his cue and moved on to vacuuming. He tried to be quick about it, keeping the noise to a minimum. As he finished up and prepared to move on to the next office, Dr. Reed called out, "Have a good night." It was such a small thing, 4 simple words, but they acknowledged him as a person, not just as the man who emptied the trash. "You too, Dr. Reed. Don't stay too late." She smiled at that, a real smile that reached her eyes. "I'll try." Michael pushed his cart out into the hallway, continuing on his rounds. As he moved to the next office, he found himself thinking about Dr. Reed. In 3 years, he'd cleaned hundreds of offices, seen thousands of employees come and go, but few had ever really looked at him the way she did, like he was an actual human being worthy of basic courtesy. The rest of his shift passed in its usual rhythm: empty trash, wipe surfaces, vacuum floors, repeat. By 11:30 p.m., he had finished the executive floor and moved down to the next level. By 2 a.m., his shift was over, and he was heading out to the employee parking lot, where his 10-year-old Honda waited faithfully. The night air was cool on his face as he drove home to his small apartment on the east side of town. The streets were nearly empty at this hour, the traffic lights changing from red to green for no one in particular. As he drove, he thought about Dr. Reed standing at her whiteboard, lost in thought. He thought about the papers he'd organized, the diagrams he'd glimpsed. And he thought about his own abandoned dreams of becoming an engineer. But those were thoughts for another time. Tomorrow would bring another night of the same routine, another night of being mostly invisible, another night of cleaning up after people who rarely noticed he existed. What Michael didn't know was that in just a few weeks everything would change. His path and Dr. Reed's would cross in ways neither of them could have imagined. But for now, he was just the man who cleaned her office every night, and she was just the woman who remembered to say hello. The next few weeks followed the same pattern. Night after night, Michael would arrive at 8 p.m., push his cleaning cart through the hallways of Westlake Corporate Center, and find Dr. Reed still working in her office. Sometimes she was typing furiously at her computer, other times staring at her whiteboard with an intense look of concentration. She always greeted him with a small smile or nod, and sometimes they exchanged a few words about the weather or how late she was working. It became a quiet ritual between them, these brief, polite interactions that punctuated Michael's otherwise solitary night shift. He found himself looking forward to reaching the eastern wing of the executive floor, wondering what problem might have Dr. Reed so absorbed that evening. One night in early October, Michael arrived at her office to find an unusual scene. Papers were everywhere, not just on her desk but spread across the floor, taped to the walls, even stuck to the windows. Dr. Reed stood in the middle of this paper hurricane, hands on her hips, looking frustrated. "Rough day?" Michael asked. As he knocked on the door frame, she looked up, pushing a strand of hair back from her face. "You could say that. We've got a major deadline coming up for this green building project, and I can't seem to make the numbers work." She gestured at the chaos around her. "I've been at it for 12 hours straight." Michael nodded sympathetically and began his usual routine, starting with the overflowing trash can. As he worked, he couldn't help glancing at some of the papers. They contained complex equations about heat transfer and energy efficiency, things he remembered from his engineering courses. One particular diagram caught his eye. It showed the cross-section of a building with arrows indicating airflow patterns. "Is that for natural ventilation?" he asked before he could stop himself. Dr. Reed turned to him, surprise evident on her face. "Yes, it is. How did you know that?" Michael felt his face grow warm. I studied engineering for a couple years in college. Didn't finish, but I remember some things." "Really?" She seemed genuinely interested. "What made you stop?" "Money," he said simply. "Or lack of it. My mom got sick and I needed to work full-time." She nodded slowly, looking at him with new eyes. That's unfortunate. Were you interested in building design? Environmental systems, actually. Renewable energy, efficient design, that kind of thing. He gestured toward the papers. Like what you're working on. Dr. Reed stared at him for a long moment, as if seeing him properly for the first time. Then she shook her head slightly. Well, that's unexpected. Michael went back to emptying the trash, feeling self-conscious. He shouldn't have said anything. It wasn't his place to comment on her work. He was just the night janitor. What did he know about the complex projects of a research director? But to his surprise, Dr. Reed didn't dismiss him. Instead, she pointed to the diagram that had caught his attention. The problem is right here. We're trying to create natural airflow through this atrium, but the simulation keeps showing dead zones where the air stagnates. Michael hesitated, then moved closer to look at the diagram. It was indeed a complex design, with multiple floors opening onto a central atrium. He studied it for a moment, remembering his thermodynamics class. Have you tried offsetting the vents? He asked. If they're directly across from each other, you get this channeling effect. But if you stagger them, he trailed off, realizing he was probably overstepping. But Dr. Reed was looking at him with interest. Go on. Encouraged, Michael continued. If you stagger the vents and vary their sizes, you can create pressure differentials that help draw air through the whole space. It's like how canyon winds work in nature. Dr. Reed's eyes widened slightly. She turned back to the diagram, examining it with renewed attention. That actually makes a lot of sense. She grabbed a marker and began making notes directly on the paper. We've been so focused on the computational fluid dynamics that we overlooked something basic. Michael watched, surprised by her reaction. He'd expected to be politely ignored, not to have his suggestion taken seriously. After all, who was he? Just the guy who cleaned up after everyone else went home. For the next 10 minutes, Dr. Reed asked him questions about airflow dynamics and thermal stratification. Michael answered cautiously at first, then with growing confidence as he realized she was genuinely interested in his input. He found himself pointing at diagrams, suggesting modifications, drawing on knowledge he hadn't used in years, but that had somehow stayed with him. Finally, she stepped back from the paper-covered wall and looked at him with new respect. You really do know your stuff. Where did you study? State University, he replied. For 2 years, anyway. And now you're taking classes again, aren't you? She asked suddenly. I've noticed your textbook sometimes. On your cart. Michael was surprised she had noticed such a detail. Yeah, at the community college. Just a few credits each semester. Trying to get that associate's degree at least. Dr. Reed nodded thoughtfully. Then, glancing at the clock, she seemed to remember herself. I'm keeping you from your work. I'm sorry about that. It's fine, Michael said, moving back to his cleaning cart. I enjoyed talking about this stuff again. Been a while. As he vacuumed her office, he could feel her watching him, as if reassessing everything she thought she knew about the night janitor. It made him uncomfortable, but also gave him a strange sense of satisfaction. For once, someone had seen past his uniform. The next night, when Michael arrived at Dr. Reed's office, he found a stack of research papers on her desk with a note. Thought you might find these interesting. O.R. He was stunned. No one at Westlake had ever given him anything before, let alone research materials related to his interests. He carefully placed the papers on his cart, planning to look at them during his break. When he reached the break room at 10:30 for his usual 15-minute rest, he sat down with the papers and began reading. They were recent publications on sustainable building design, some authored by Dr. Reed herself. The material was dense and technical, but Michael found himself absorbed, scribbling notes in the margins of his small notebook. Night after night, a new pattern emerged. Dr. Reed would leave articles or papers for him, and sometimes they would spend a few minutes discussing them when he came to clean her office. She never made a big deal of it, never called attention to what she was doing. It was as if they had a silent agreement. These brief intellectual exchanges that existed outside the normal boundaries of their vastly different positions at the company. One evening in late October, Michael arrived to find Dr. Reed's office. In an unusual state of order, the papers were neatly stacked, the whiteboard clean, her desk organized. She sat at her computer, typing quickly, but looked up when he entered. "Good evening," she said, with a warmer smile than usual. "How are your classes going?" "Pretty well," he replied, surprised by the personal question. "Midterms are next week, so I've been studying a lot." "What are you taking this semester?" "Physics 2 and Calculus 3, he said, "plus a technical writing course." She nodded approvingly. "Solid foundations. Important for any engineering specialty." Michael began his usual cleaning routine, wondering at her unusual interest. They had discussed building design and research papers, but rarely his own education. As he organized her desk, he noticed she was watching him again, that same thoughtful expression on her face. Finally, she spoke. "You know, I've been noticing something these past few weeks." Michael looked up, uncertain. "What's that?" "Every time you clean my office, you don't just empty the trash and vacuum. You organize my papers, you put related documents together. You stack them neatly." She gestured to her desk. "Tonight I tried to do it myself, but I realize I've been relying on your system without even noticing it." Michael felt embarrassed. "I hope I haven't misplaced anything important. I just thought it might help." "No, it's been incredibly helpful. You have an intuitive understanding of how information should be organized." She paused, seeming to consider her next words carefully. "And your insights on the atrium ventilation problem were spot on. The team implemented your suggestion and the simulation results improved by 30%. Michael didn't know what to say. He felt a surge of pride but also disbelief. Had his casual observation really made such a difference? "I didn't do much," he said finally. "Just pointed out something obvious." "Not obvious to a team of engineers who'd been staring at the problem for weeks," Dr. Reed countered. She leaned forward in her chair. "I think you have a natural talent for this field. It's a shame your education was interrupted." Michael shrugged, uncomfortable with the direction of the conversation. "Life happens. I'm making the best of it." "Doctor," Reed nodded slowly, still watching him with that evaluating gaze. "Yes, you are. And that's what I find most impressive." She turned back to her computer then, and Michael continued with his cleaning. But something had shifted between them. A recognition had occurred, not just Dr. Reed recognizing Michael's potential, but Michael recognizing something in himself that had been dormant for too long. As he pushed his cart toward the next office, he felt a strange mix of emotions. Pride in the knowledge he still possessed, regret for the degree he hadn't completed, hope for what might still be possible, and beneath it all, a growing sense that these brief interactions with Dr. Reed might be leading somewhere unexpected. For the first time in years, Michael felt seen not just as a janitor, but as a person with value, with knowledge, with potential. What he didn't yet realize was that Dr. Reed had begun to see him as something else entirely, not just as someone with untapped potential, but as a possible solution to a problem she'd been wrestling with for months. November arrived with bitter cold winds and early darkness. Michael now arrived for his shift when the sky was already black, the parking lot illuminated only by tall lampposts casting pools of yellow light. Inside Westlake Corporate Center, the atmosphere had changed as well. There was a tension in the air, a sense of urgency that hadn't been there before. End-of-year deadlines. The day shift supervisor had explained when Michael asked about the increased hours everyone seemed to be working. The big bosses want results before the new year. This explained why, night after night, Michael found Dr. Reed still at her desk, often surrounded by other team members who stayed late into the evening. Their conversations would halt when he entered to clean, resuming in hushed tones after he left. It made him uncomfortable, as if he'd been demoted back to invisibility after those weeks of being noticed. The research papers stopped appearing on her desk with his name on them. Their brief discussions of engineering principles ceased. Dr. Reed still greeted him politely, but she seemed distracted, sometimes not even looking up from her computer when he entered. Michael told himself it didn't matter. Their worlds were different. Those few weeks of connection had been unusual, a temporary bridge between two separate lives. Now things were back to normal. He was the night janitor again. Nothing more. But he missed their conversations. Missed being treated like someone whose thoughts had value. Missed most of all the brief glimpse he'd had of the world he might have belonged to if life had gone differently. On a particularly cold Tuesday night in mid-November, Michael arrived at Dr. Reed's office to find her alone for the first time in weeks. The rest of the executive floor was dark and empty, but light spilled from her doorway along with the sound of frustrated sighing. He knocked gently on the doorframe. "Evening, Dr. Reed." She looked up, her face drawn with exhaustion. Dark circles shadowed her eyes, and her normally neat hair was coming loose from its clip. She'd been running her hands through it, a habit he'd noticed she had when frustrated. "Oh, hello," she said, attempting a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Is it that time already?" 8:15, he confirmed, wheeling his cart into the room. "Working late again?" "Always," she said with a humorless laugh. She gestured toward a stack of files on her desk. "End-of-year report due tomorrow. Energy efficiency projections for the Greenfield project. And I'm missing something crucial, but I can't figure out..." "What?" Michael nodded sympathetically and began emptying her trash can, which was overflowing with coffee cups and granola bar wrappers. She must have been here all day without a proper break. As he worked, he couldn't help glancing at the whiteboard behind her desk. It was covered with equations and diagrams, energy flow models for a large-scale building project. His eyes followed the calculations, noting the careful attention to solar gain, insulation factors, and HVAC loads. Then he saw it. A small error in one of the base assumptions that was throwing off all the subsequent calculations. The thermal conductivity value for the exterior walls was wrong. Someone had used the standard value without accounting for the specialized materials mentioned in the notes at the bottom of the board. He hesitated. Things had been different between them lately. Maybe she wouldn't welcome his input now. Maybe he'd been reading too much into their earlier interactions. But Dr. Reed had noticed his attention to the whiteboard. "See something interesting?" she asked, her tone neutral. Michael took a breath. "Actually, I think there might be a small problem with one of the values." She raised an eyebrow, looking skeptical. "Which one?" He pointed to the thermal conductivity equation. "This is using the standard K value for concrete, but your notes mention a specialized composite material. If that's true, this number should be about 30% lower." Dr. Reed stared at him, then at the whiteboard. She stood up and walked to it, scanning the equations with narrowed eyes. Then she grabbed a calculator from her desk and punched in some numbers rapidly. "You're right," she said finally, her voice filled with disbelief. "How did everyone miss that? How did I miss that?" She turned to look at him. "How did you see it so quickly?" Michael shrugged, uncomfortable with her scrutiny. "I noticed the notes first, about the new material. Then the K value just looked wrong based on that." She shook her head slowly. 3 engineers and an energy consultant have looked at these calculations today, and no one caught it. She picked up a marker and corrected the value, then began working through the subsequent equations, updating the results. Michael returned to his cleaning, trying to ignore the growing excitement in Dr. Reed's face as she reworked the numbers. It wasn't his place to get involved. He was just doing his job. But as he was about to leave with his cart, Dr. Reed suddenly called out, "Wait!" He turned back. She was standing by the whiteboard, marker still in hand, looking at him with an expression he couldn't quite read. "Do you think?" she started, then paused as if wrestling with a decision. Finally, she gestured to the chair across from her desk. "Do you think we could start right here? I could use another perspective on this." Michael stared at her, not comprehending at first. "I'm sorry?" "Sit down," she said, more decisively now. "Just for a few minutes. Look at these numbers with me." He glanced at his watch. He had a schedule to keep, other offices to clean. But the look on her face, a mixture of desperation and hope, made him set his reservations aside. Just for a few minutes, he agreed, settling awkwardly into the visitor's chair across from her desk. It felt strange to be sitting in an executive office rather than cleaning it. Dr. Reed pulled her chair around to sit beside him rather than across the desk, reducing the obvious power differential between them. She spread out several documents in front of him: energy usage projections, material specifications, system designs. The problem is that even with the corrected K value, we're still not meeting the efficiency targets for this project, she explained. The client wants a net zero energy building, but our models show we're coming up short by about 12%. Michael looked over the documents carefully. This was a large-scale commercial building, much more complex than anything he'd studied in his 2 years of college. But the basic principles were the same, and he found himself quickly absorbing the details. "What about the roof?" he asked after a few minutes of study. "What about it?" Dr. Reed replied. "You've got solar panels covering 60%, which is good. But the other 40% is standard white reflective roofing." He pointed to the specifications. "There's a lot of wasted potential there. We need access paths for maintenance, plus space for the HVAC equipment," she explained. "But what if you elevated the walkways?" Michael suggested. "Create a second level with permeable metal grating. Put solar panels underneath, and use the spaces between the grating to improve airflow for cooling." Dr. Reed stared at him, then at the plans. "That would increase the solar capacity by at least 25%. She quickly scribbled some calculations. "And the improved airflow could reduce cooling loads by maybe 3 to 5%. She looked back at him, excitement growing in her expression. "That might be enough to get us to net zero." For the next hour, Michael forgot that he was a night janitor. He forgot about his cleaning schedule. He forgot about the difference in their positions. He just focused on the problem in front of him, trading ideas with Dr. Reed as they refined the concept, identified potential issues, and calculated the impact on overall building performance. It was the most intellectually stimulating conversation he'd had in years. Dr. Reed treated him as an equal, valuing his input, challenging his assumptions, building on his ideas with her own expertise. Together, they developed a solution that neither would have created alone. Finally, Michael glanced at his watch and was shocked to see it was almost 10 o'clock. He'd spent nearly 2 hours in her office. "I need to get back to work," he said, standing up reluctantly. "I'm way behind schedule." Dr. Reed looked equally surprised by the time. "Of course. I'm sorry to have kept you so long." She gathered the papers they'd been working on, a new energy in her movements. This is really promising, Michael. You've helped me solve a problem that's been haunting this project for months." "Happy to help," he said, feeling a strange mix of pride and embarrassment. "I should finish cleaning your office at least before I move on." "Don't worry about it tonight," she said, waving a hand dismissively. "You've done much more important work here than emptying my trash can." Michael hesitated, not sure how to respond. This was his job. He couldn't just skip an office because he'd spent time helping with a project that wasn't his responsibility. Sensing his conflict, Dr. Reed added, "I'll explain to your supervisor if there's any issue. I kept you from your duties." Michael nodded, still uncomfortable but seeing no alternative. He moved toward the door where his cart waited patiently. "Michael," Dr. Reed called as he reached the threshold. He turned back. She was looking at him with an intensity that made him pause. "Thank you, not just for tonight, but for seeing something that the rest of us missed. Sometimes fresh eyes are exactly what we need." He nodded, not trusting himself to speak. The gratitude in her voice was something he rarely experienced in this job. "I may need your help again," she added, almost as an afterthought. "Would that be okay?" "Sure," he said, surprised at the question. "Anytime." As he pushed his cart down the darkened hallway, leaving Dr. Reed's illuminated office behind, Michael felt something he hadn't experienced in a long time, a sense of purpose. For years, his work had been about making spaces clean, about erasing the evidence of other people's days. Important work, but invisible. Tonight he'd helped create something. He'd been not just seen, but valued. And for the first time in years, he'd caught a glimpse of who he might have become if life had taken a different path. What Michael didn't know, couldn't have guessed, was that Dr. Reed was still sitting at her desk, staring thoughtfully at the door where he'd disappeared. She was remembering his quick grasp of complex concepts, his innovative thinking, his humble confidence, and she was forming an idea that would soon change both their lives completely. Meanwhile, Michael rushed through the rest of his cleaning duties, his mind still buzzing with the problems they'd solved together, the building plans, the energy calculations, the creative solutions they'd developed. It all felt more real and important than the trash cans he was emptying or the floors he was vacuuming. For the first time in years, he went home feeling not exhausted but exhilarated, as if he'd rediscovered a part of himself that had been dormant for too long. He didn't know it yet, but this night was just the beginning. The question Dr. Reed had asked, "Do you think we could start right here?" would prove to be much more significant than either of them realized at the time. It wasn't just about solving a technical problem. It was about recognizing potential in unexpected places, about crossing boundaries that kept people in prescribed roles, about the beginning of a partnership that would challenge the established order of things. But all that was still to come. For now, Michael drove home through the quiet city streets, replaying their conversation in his mind, feeling more alive than he had in years. Over the next few weeks, what had begun as a one-time consultation evolved into a regular occurrence. Michael would finish cleaning the other offices on the executive floor, saving Dr. Reed's for last. Then, instead of just emptying her trash and vacuuming, he would spend 30 minutes, sometimes an hour, reviewing project plans, discussing technical problems, or brainstorming solutions to design challenges. It became their secret routine. No one else knew that the night janitor was contributing ideas to Westlake's most prestigious green building project. Dr. Reed never mentioned his input in her team meetings. Michael never spoke about it to his supervisor or fellow custodial staff. It existed in a strange, liminal space, these late-night collaborations that crossed professional boundaries. For Michael, these sessions were transformative. His mind, which had been occupied with class schedules and bill payments for so long, now engaged with complex technical challenges again. He found himself looking forward to work in a way he never had before, spending his free time researching green building technologies so he could bring new ideas to their discussions. One cold night in early December, Michael arrived at Westlake to find Dr. Reed waiting for him near the employee entrance rather than in her office. She wore a heavy coat and held 2 paper cups of coffee. "I thought you might like this," she said, offering him one of the cups. "It's cold out there." "Thanks," he said, surprised by the gesture. "Is everything okay?" "Everything's fine," she assured him. "I just wanted to talk to you before you started your shift. Can we sit for a moment?" They found a small table in the empty employee break room. Michael sat awkwardly, still wearing his heavy coat, his cleaning uniform visible underneath. "Doctor," Reed seemed uncharacteristically nervous, turning her coffee cup in circles on the table. "I've been meaning to ask you something," she said finally. "Why did you never go back to finish your engineering degree, after your mother recovered?" The question caught Michael off guard. They had never discussed his personal life in such direct terms before. "She never fully recovered," he said quietly. "The medical bills kept coming. And by then I'd lost my scholarship. The timing never seemed right to go back." He took a sip of coffee. "But I'm still taking classes, slowly building towards something." She nodded thoughtfully. "And your family situation now?" "My mother passed away 2 years ago," he said, the words still difficult to speak aloud. "It's just me now." "I'm sorry to hear that," Dr. Reed said, genuine compassion in her voice. "That must have been very difficult." Michael shrugged, uncomfortable with her sympathy. "Life goes on. I'm making it work." "Yes, you are," she agreed. "More than making it work, actually, which is why I wanted to talk to you tonight." She took a deep breath. I've been so impressed by your contributions to the Greenfield project. You have a natural talent for this work, Michael. A fresh perspective that's been invaluable. Thank you, he said, feeling a flush of pride mixed with embarrassment. I've enjoyed it. I think you could do much more, she continued, leaning forward slightly. Which is why I wanted to tell you that there's going to be an opening on my team next month. A junior position in sustainable design. Michael froze, coffee cup halfway to his lips. What are you saying? I'm saying you should apply, Dr. Reed stated plainly. I think you'd be an excellent candidate. For a moment, Michael couldn't speak. The idea was so unexpected, so far from anything he'd imagined that he couldn't process it. But I don't have a degree, he said finally. I haven't even finished my associates. The position requires 2 years of college coursework in a relevant field, which you have, she countered. Plus you have 3 years of experience with the company, which counts for something. As a janitor, he pointed out, his voice flat. As someone who's already contributed significant innovations to our highest profile project, she corrected. I've been documenting your input, Michael. The elevated walkway design, the modified air handling system, the passive cooling integration. These are all your ideas that we've incorporated. He stared at her, stunned. You've been keeping track? Of course, she said, as if it were the most natural thing in the world. I've credited you in my project notes, not by name but as a design consultant. I've been building a case. Michael set down his coffee cup, his hand suddenly unsteady. A case for what? For bringing you onto the team officially, she said, meeting his gaze directly. For giving you the opportunity you should have had years ago. The silence that followed was heavy with unspoken complications. Michael's mind raced with possibilities and objections. He couldn't just switch from cleaning offices to designing buildings. The other employees would never accept him. He didn't have the right clothes, the right background, the right credentials. I don't know, he said finally. It seems impossible. It's not, Dr. Reed insisted. It will be challenging, yes. There will be skeptics. But you've proven your abilities to me, and I have some influence here. The rest would be up to you. Michael looked down at his hands, rough from years of manual labor. Could those same hands draw building plans, shape sustainable designs, create something lasting? The idea both thrilled and terrified him. I'd need to think about it, he said cautiously. Of course, she agreed. The position won't be posted until after New Year's. You have time to consider. She hesitated, then added, and if you decide to apply, I'd be happy to help you prepare. Update your resume, practice interviewing, that sort of thing. Michael looked at her, trying to understand. Why are you doing this? Why would you take this kind of risk for me? Dr. Reed considered the question carefully. Partly because I believe in your abilities. The company would benefit from your talent and perspective. She paused. But also because I believe in giving people second chances, in recognizing potential wherever it appears. She didn't elaborate further, but Michael sensed there was more to her motivation, some personal connection to his situation that she wasn't sharing. I'll think about it, he promised. She nodded, seeming satisfied. That's all I ask. Now I should let you get to work. She stood, gathering her coat. And Michael? Whatever you decide, I've valued our collaboration these past weeks. It's reminded me why I got into this field in the first place. After she left, Michael sat alone in the break room for several minutes, his coffee growing cold, his mind spinning with possibilities. A junior position in sustainable design, a chance to use his mind instead of just his hands, a completely different future than the one he'd resigned himself to. Could he really do it? Cross that invisible boundary between the people who cleaned, the offices and the people who worked in them. Would anyone take him seriously, or would he always be seen as the janitor who got lucky? Over the next 2 weeks, these questions consumed his thoughts. During the day, he researched the position, looking up typical job responsibilities and salary ranges. At night, between cleaning duties, he continued his collaboration with Dr. Reed, but now with a new awareness of possibility humming beneath their interactions. She was true to her word, never pressuring him, but making resources available. Textbooks, online courses, reference materials. One night she handed him a flash drive with building design software and tutorials. "Just in case you want to practice," she said casually. Michael spent his free hours learning the software, amazed at how quickly he adapted to it. The concepts came naturally to him, his spatial thinking translating easily to the digital medium. He found himself designing small structures, implementing the energy-efficient features they'd discussed, feeling a growing confidence in his abilities. Christmas came and went, a quiet day alone in his small apartment. New Year's Eve found him studying building codes rather than celebrating. And then suddenly it was January, and the position was officially posted on Westlake's career website. Junior Designer, Sustainable Building Systems. The job description might as well have been written for him, emphasizing innovative thinking and practical problem-solving over credentials. The minimum requirements included 2 years of college coursework in engineering, architecture, or related fields, and demonstrated interest in sustainable design principles. Michael read and reread the posting until he had it memorized. Then, one evening before his shift, he sat down at his computer and began to write his application. His work experience section was brief: 3 years as a custodial technician at Westlake, plus various odd jobs before that. His education section listed his 2 years at the State University, plus the community college courses he'd taken since then. But in the cover letter, he poured out his passion for sustainable design, his vision for buildings that worked with nature rather than against it. He described his self-directed learning, his ongoing studies, his determination to contribute to a field he'd never stopped caring about despite the detours his life had taken. He didn't mention his late-night collaborations with Dr. Reed. She had advised him not to, suggesting it would be better if she addressed that in her own recommendation. "The hiring committee should evaluate your application on its merits," she'd explained. "My input will come later." Submitting the application felt like stepping off a cliff. Michael hit send and then sat staring at the confirmation screen, a mixture of hope and terror washing over him. What had he done? Was he setting himself up for humiliation? For rejection? For a painful reminder of all the opportunities that had passed him by? But beneath those fears was something stronger, a sense that for the first time in years, he was moving towards something, rather than just surviving. He was reaching for a future he wanted, not just accepting the one that circumstances had assigned to him. The response came more quickly than he expected. Just 3 days after submitting his application, he received an email requesting an interview. It was scheduled for the following week during the day, which meant he would need to request time off from his custodial shift, making his application public knowledge among his supervisors and co-workers. The news spread quickly through the custodial staff. Some were supportive, patting him on the back and wishing him luck. Others were skeptical, even resentful, making comments just loud enough for him to hear. Getting ideas above his station. Who does he think he's fooling? Must have connections. No way they'd hire a janitor otherwise. His supervisor, Tony, called him into his office for a frank conversation. "I'm not going to lie, Michael, this is unusual. But you've been a good worker, always reliable. If this is what you want to pursue, I won't stand in your way." The day of the interview arrived, bringing with it a new set of anxieties. Michael had purchased a new shirt and tie, nothing expensive but professional enough to pass. He'd polished his one pair of dress shoes until they gleamed. He'd practiced answers to potential questions for hours, with Dr. Reed coaching him over coffee after his shifts. But nothing could have prepared him for the reality of sitting in Westlake's sleek conference room, facing a panel of 4 people: the HR manager, the department director, a senior designer, and Dr. Reed herself. She had recused herself from asking questions due to their working relationship, but her presence on the panel sent a clear message about her support for his candidacy. The interview began with standard questions about his background, his interest in the position, his relevant experience. Michael answered carefully, emphasizing his coursework in engineering and his ongoing studies. When asked about his knowledge of sustainable design, he spoke about the principles he'd researched, the techniques he'd studied independently. Then came the technical questions, the ones designed to test his actual knowledge. This was where Michael surprised them. Question after question about building systems, energy modeling, material properties. He answered with a confidence that visibly impressed the panel. His lack of formal credentials was offset by a depth of understanding that couldn't be faked. Finally, the department director leaned forward, his expression serious. "Mr. Williams, I have to ask the obvious question. You've been working as a custodian here for 3 years. That's quite a different role from what you're applying for now. What makes you think you can make this transition successfully?" It was the question Michael had been dreading, yet expecting. He took a deep breath. "I've never stopped being an engineer in my mind," he said quietly. "I've never stopped learning, studying, thinking about these issues. Yes, I clean offices at night, but during the day, and on weekends and in every spare moment, I've been building the knowledge I need for a role like this." He paused, then continued more confidently. "I believe my background gives me a unique perspective. I understand how buildings actually function not just in theory but in practice. I've seen what works and what doesn't, what lasts and what breaks down. And I've never stopped believing that I have something valuable to contribute to this field." The room fell silent. The director studied him for a long moment, then nodded slightly. "Thank you for your honesty, Mr. Williams. That will be all for today." As Michael left the conference room, his heart pounding, he had no idea whether he'd just thrown away his one chance or opened the door to a new life. All he knew was that he'd spoken his truth, and whatever happened next, he'd done everything he could. What he couldn't have known was that his interview had sparked an intense debate among the hiring committee. Some argued that hiring a custodian would undermine the department's professional standards. Others worried about resentment from other employees. Still others questioned whether he truly had the necessary skills, despite his impressive interview. But Dr. Reed had come prepared. She presented the documentation of his contributions to the Greenfield project, the innovative solutions he'd developed, the problems he'd solved, the fresh perspective he'd brought. She made a passionate case not just for his technical abilities, but for the message his hiring would send about Westlake's values, about recognizing talent wherever it appeared, about second chances, about judging people by their capabilities, rather than their circumstances. The debate continued for hours after Michael had gone home, stretching into the evening. And in the end, it wasn't just Dr. Reed's advocacy that tipped the balance. It was Michael himself, his quiet confidence, his obvious knowledge, his remarkable journey from university student to night janitor to potential designer. 3 days later, Michael received a phone call that would change his life forever. The voice on the other end was the HR manager, formal but with a hint of warmth. "Mr. Williams? I'm pleased to inform you that we would like to offer you the position of junior designer in our Sustainable Building Systems department." For a moment, Michael couldn't speak. The words seemed to hang in the air, impossible yet real. Then reality crashed over him in a wave of emotion, disbelief, joy, vindication, fear, all mixed together. "Thank you," he managed finally. "Thank you. I accept." The HR manager continued with details about start date, salary, benefits, all important information that Michael barely processed. All he could think was, it happened. It actually happened. After all these years, all these struggles, all these detours, he was going to be an engineer after all. That night, he cleaned the executive floor for the last time. When he reached Dr. Reed's office, she was waiting for him, a small smile on her face. "I heard the news," she said simply. "Congratulations." "I couldn't have done it without you," Michael replied, his voice thick with emotion. She shook her head. "You did this, Michael. I just opened a door. You walked through it on your own merit." They looked at each other for a long moment, both aware of the unusual journey that had brought them to this point. From night janitor and executive to collaborators, to colleagues. It was a transformation neither could have predicted. "It won't be easy," Dr. Reed warned. "There will be people who question whether you belong here." "I know," Michael acknowledged. "But for the first time in a long time, I believe that I do belong, and I'm ready to prove it." As he pushed his cleaning cart down the hallway for the final time, Michael felt a profound sense of transition. Tomorrow, he would return to this same building, walk these same hallways, but as a different person in a different role. The invisible boundary that had separated him from the people whose offices he cleaned had been crossed. It was just the beginning. There would be challenges ahead, obstacles to overcome, doubters to convince. But tonight, as he completed his last shift as a custodian, Michael Williams allowed himself to feel something he'd almost forgotten: hope. Not just for a better job or a higher salary, but for a life where his mind and his potential were finally recognized, where the person others saw when they looked at him matched the person he had always known himself to be. On a cold Monday morning, in January, Michael stood outside the main entrance of Westlake Corporate Center, dressed in new clothes he'd spent hours choosing: dark gray slacks, a blue button-down shirt, a simple tie. His hands gripped the strap of the messenger bag that contained his notebook, pens, and a small lunch he'd packed the night before. For 3 years, he had entered through the service entrance at the back of the building. Today, he would walk through the front doors like everyone else. He took a deep breath, watching it cloud in the winter air, and tried to calm his racing heart. This was what he'd worked for, what he'd dreamed about during countless nights of emptying trash cans and mopping floors. But now that the moment had arrived, he found himself frozen with a mixture of excitement and terror. "First day jitters?" a friendly voice asked. Michael turned to see Dr. Reed approaching, wrapped in a stylish wool coat, a leather portfolio tucked under her arm. Her smile was reassuring. "Is it that obvious?" he asked with a nervous laugh. "It's completely normal," she assured him. "I still remember my first day here. I was so nervous I put salt in my coffee instead of sugar." The small anecdote helped Michael relax slightly. Even Dr. Reed, confident, accomplished Dr. Reed, had once been a newcomer, had once felt out of place. "Ready?" she asked, nodding toward the entrance. "As I'll ever be," Michael replied, squaring his shoulders. They walked through the revolving doors together. The lobby looked different in the morning light. Busier, brighter, filled with people in business attire hurrying toward the elevators. Some nodded to Dr. Reed as they passed. No one seemed to notice Michael, which was both a relief and strangely disorienting. For years he had been invisible in this building by default. Now he was just another professional arriving for work. The security guard at the reception desk, however, did a double take. "Williams, is that you?" It was Carlos, who had often been on duty during the night shift. He and Michael had sometimes shared coffee during breaks. "Hey, Carlos," Michael said, suddenly self-conscious. "Yeah, it's me." "Man, you look different in a tie," Carlos observed with a grin. "Heard you got a promotion. Moving on up, huh?" "Something like that," Michael agreed, grateful for the friendly face. Dr. Reed waited patiently during this exchange, then guided Michael toward the elevator. "You'll need this now," she said, handing him a new ID badge. "It gives you access to the design department on the 5th floor." The badge felt significant in Michael's hand, a physical symbol of his new identity, his new role. He clipped it to his shirt pocket, feeling both proud and slightly fraudulent. Part of him was still waiting for someone to stop him, to tell him there had been a mistake, to send him back to the janitorial closet where he belonged. As they rode the elevator up to the 5th floor, Dr. Reed gave him a brief orientation. "The design team has a weekly meeting Monday mornings at 9. We'll head there first so I can introduce you to everyone. Then I'll show you to your workspace and help you get set up." Michael nodded, trying to absorb everything while managing his anxiety. The elevator doors opened onto a floor he'd cleaned countless times, but had never seen in daylight hours. The morning sun streamed through the large windows, illuminating a space of open workstations, private offices along the perimeter, and several glass-walled conference rooms. Dr. Reed led him to the largest conference room, where about 15 people were already gathering around a long table. Conversations quieted as they entered, and Michael felt all eyes turned toward him. He resisted the urge to shrink back, to make himself invisible as he had for so long. "Good morning, everyone," Dr. Reed said with calm authority. "Before we get started, I'd like to introduce our newest team member. This is Michael Williams, who's joining us as a junior designer in sustainable building systems. There was a murmur of greetings, some more enthusiastic than others. Michael managed a smile and a brief "good morning" in response. He noticed a few people exchanging glances, and he knew immediately that word had spread about his previous position. The custodian who somehow got promoted to designer. The janitor who crossed the line. Dr. Reed indicated an empty chair, and Michael sat down, trying to appear more confident than he felt. As the meeting began, with updates on various projects and discussion of upcoming deadlines, he listened intently, taking careful notes, determined to absorb as much as possible. When the Greenfield project came up, the one he'd contributed to during those late-night sessions with Dr. Reed, he found himself leaning forward, recognizing the designs, understanding the challenges being discussed. This at least was familiar territory. "We've implemented a new approach to the roofing system," Dr. Reed was explaining, displaying renderings on the large screen at the end of the room. "The elevated walkway design has increased our solar capacity significantly while improving airflow for passive cooling." A senior designer named Robert Harris interrupted with a skeptical expression. "I'm still not convinced about the structural integrity of those elevated walkways. The additional load on the roof membrane concerns me." Before Dr. Reed could respond, Michael found himself speaking up. "The design uses a distributed weight system," he explained, surprising himself with his own confidence. "The load is carried by vertical supports that extend down to the structural beams, bypassing the roof membrane entirely." All eyes turned to him again, but this time with various expressions of surprise or evaluation, rather than just curiosity about the new person. Robert raised an eyebrow. "And you've run the calculations on this?" "Yes," Michael replied. "The safety factor is 1.5 times building code requirements." He hadn't run those calculations officially as a designer, of course, but during those evening sessions with Dr. Reed, they had worked through the numbers thoroughly. There was a moment of silence, then Robert nodded slowly. "I'd like to see those calcs, but that addresses my concern." Dr. Reed gave Michael a small, approving nod before moving on with the presentation. For the first time that morning, Michael felt a glimmer of genuine confidence. He knew this material. He understood these concepts. Maybe he did belong here after all. After the meeting, Dr. Reed showed him to his workstation, a desk with a computer, dual monitors, and a small drafting table in the corner. It was located in a cluster of 4 workstations, the other 3 belonging to junior and mid-level designers. "This is Daniel, Lisa, and Tran," Dr. Reed introduced his new neighbors. "They'll help you get oriented to the systems and workflows." The 3 greeted him with varying degrees of warmth. Daniel, a young man who looked fresh out of college, seemed genuinely friendly. Lisa offered a professional but reserved smile. Tran simply nodded, his expression unreadable. As Dr. Reed left him to get settled, Michael could feel the weight of unspoken questions hanging in the air. Finally, Lisa broke the silence. "So, is it true you were working in custodial before this?" she asked directly. Michael appreciated her straightforwardness, if not the question itself. "Yes," he said simply. "For 3 years." "Huh," she said, studying him with new interest. "That's unusual." "How did you make the switch?" Daniel asked, seemingly more curious than judgmental. Michael considered how to answer. He decided honesty was the best approach. "I studied engineering in college, but had to drop out. I took this job to pay the bills, but I kept studying on my own. Dr. Reed noticed I had some knowledge in this field and encouraged me to apply when this position opened up." "Just like that?" Tran asked, speaking for the first time, his tone skeptical. "Not exactly," Michael replied. "I had to interview like anyone else, prove I knew what I was talking about." The 3 exchanged glances, and Michael could read their thoughts clearly. They had degrees from good schools, had followed the traditional path, had competed for these positions against other qualified candidates, and here was this former janitor, now sitting among them as a peer. "Well," Daniel said finally, breaking the tension with a smile. We could use some fresh perspectives around here, and anyone who impresses Dr. Reed must know their stuff. It wasn't universal acceptance, but it was a start. Over the next few hours, Daniel helped Michael navigate the company's computer systems, showed him how to access the design software, and explained their file naming conventions. Lisa remained professionally cordial but distant. Tran mostly ignored him, focused on his own work. By lunchtime, Michael's head was spinning with new information. When Daniel invited him to join a group heading to the cafeteria, he gratefully accepted, though his stomach was too knotted with anxiety to feel hungry. The cafeteria was another new experience. As a night janitor, he had cleaned this space but never eaten here. Now he stood in line with other employees, tray in hand, trying to act as if he belonged. As they sat at a table with several other designers, Michael could feel the curious glances, could hear the whispered comments. News of his unusual career path had clearly spread throughout the department. He focused on his food, answering questions when addressed directly, but otherwise trying to observe and learn the social dynamics of this new world. "Don't let it get to you," Daniel said quietly as they walked back to their workstations after lunch. "People will talk for a week or two, then something else will catch their attention." "I expected it," Michael assured him. "It's fine." But it wasn't entirely fine, and they both knew it. The afternoon brought more challenges. A steep learning curve on specialized software, unfamiliar terminology in emails, a corporate culture he was experiencing from the inside for the first time. By the end of the day, Michael was mentally exhausted, his confidence wavering. As he was packing up to leave, Dr. Reed stopped by his desk. "How was day one?" she asked. "Overwhelming," he admitted. "But I'm learning." She nodded, understanding in her eyes. "That's normal. First days always are." She paused, then added, "You did well in the meeting this morning. Your comment about the structural supports was spot on." "Thanks," Michael said, the small praise bolstering his flagging spirits. "I remembered our discussions about it." "You earned this position, Michael," she said firmly, as if reading his doubts. "Remember that." As he headed home that evening, taking the bus instead of driving since his shift no longer ended at 2 a.m., Michael replayed the day in his mind. It had been challenging, often uncomfortable, occasionally encouraging. A first step on a long road. The days that followed established a pattern. Each morning brought new technical challenges that Michael tackled with growing confidence. His background knowledge, while unorthodox, proved solid. His practical experience with how buildings actually functioned gave him insights his colleagues sometimes lacked. And his determination to prove himself worthy of this opportunity drove him to work harder than anyone else, staying late to master software, reading technical manuals at home, asking thoughtful questions that showed his eagerness to learn. But the social challenges were harder to navigate. Some colleagues, like Daniel, were welcoming and supportive. Others maintained a professional distance. A few, like Robert Harris and a senior manager named Phillips, were openly skeptical, watching for any mistake that would confirm their belief that Michael didn't belong. "It's tokenism, plain and simple," Michael overheard Phillips saying one day in the break room. "Reed wanted to make some kind of statement about social mobility or whatever. Meanwhile, we've got graduates from top programs who can't get their foot in the door." The words stung, but Michael forced himself to remember Dr. Reed's assurance. He had earned this. His ideas for the Greenfield project had been implemented based on their merit, not as some charitable gesture. And each day, as he solved problems and contributed to discussions, he gathered small pieces of evidence that he did, indeed, belong in this role. 3 weeks into his new position, Michael faced his first major test. The team was struggling with an energy modeling issue on a new project, a community center that needed to meet stringent efficiency standards on a limited budget. The conventional approaches weren't working within the constraints, and frustration was mounting. During a team meeting, after several proposed solutions had been rejected as too expensive or impractical, Michael hesitantly raised his hand. "I have an idea that might work," he said, uncomfortable with all eyes turning to him. It's unconventional, but I think it addresses both the budget and performance issues. Dr. Reed nodded encouragingly. Go ahead, Michael. He stood and walked to the whiteboard, feeling his heart pounding but determined to prove his value. For the next 10 minutes, he outlined an approach that combined several low-tech, low-cost strategies in novel ways: oriented thermal mass, strategically placed operable windows, and a modified tram wall system that could be built with local materials. As he drew diagrams and explained the physics behind his approach, he could see expressions changing around the table. Skepticism gave way to consideration, then to interest. When he finished, there was a moment of silence. Then Robert Harris, who had been one of his most vocal critics, leaned forward. That's actually quite innovative. Where did you come up with this? Michael hesitated, then decided on honesty. When I was studying engineering, I had a professor who specialized in indigenous building techniques. These approaches have been used for centuries in various climates, just not in modern commercial buildings. I think we could adapt them using contemporary materials and control systems. The meeting erupted into a flurry of questions and suggestions. Michael answered each one, drawing on his knowledge, acknowledging when he wasn't certain but offering to research further. By the end of the hour, his approach had been adopted as the foundation for the project's energy strategy, with a team assigned to develop it further, a team that included Michael. As people filed out of the conference room, Phillips lingered behind, approaching Michael with a thoughtful expression. That was good work, he said, the admission seeming to cost him some effort. Unorthodox but good. Thank you, Michael replied simply, recognizing the significance of the moment. I still think your path here was unusual, Phillips continued. But I respect results, and that was a solid solution to a difficult problem. It wasn't full acceptance, but it was professional recognition. Michael would take it. That evening, as he packed up to go home, Dr. Reed stopped by his desk again, as she often did at the end of the day. But this time she wasn't alone. The company's CEO, a man Michael had only ever seen from a distance, stood beside her. Michael, this is James Harrington, Dr. Reed introduced. He wanted to meet you. Michael stood quickly, extending his hand, with a confidence he was still developing. It's an honor, sir. Olivia has told me about your solution for the community center project, Harrington said, shaking Michael's hand firmly. Creative thinking like that is exactly what Westlake needs more of. Thank you, Michael replied, surprised by the high-level attention. I also find your journey to this position interesting, Harrington continued. Not many people would have the perseverance to keep pursuing their goals while working nights as a custodian. That says something about your character. Michael nodded, unsure how to respond to the personal observation. We're creating a new initiative, Harrington explained. Looking for talent in unexpected places, people with non-traditional backgrounds, but valuable skills and perspectives. Your success here has been instructive. After Harrington left, Dr. Reed stayed behind, a small smile on her face. You've made quite an impression, she said. Not just on him, but on the whole team. I'm just trying to do good work, Michael replied honestly. You're doing more than that, she said. You're changing how people think about potential and opportunity, about who belongs in these roles. 6 months later, Michael stood at the construction site of the Greenfield project, watching as workers installed the elevated walkway system he had first conceived during those late-night conversations with Dr. Reed. The building was taking shape, not just as a physical structure, but as a manifestation of ideas, of collaboration, of possibilities. Much had changed in those 6 months. Michael had been promoted to designer, no longer junior. He had completed additional courses at the community college and was now enrolled in a weekend program to finally complete his engineering degree. He had moved to a better apartment, bought some new clothes, even treated himself to a newer car. But the most significant changes were less tangible. The confidence in his voice when he spoke in meetings, the ease with which he now navigated the corporate environment, the respect he had earned from colleagues who had once doubted him, the mentoring he had begun to provide to other employees from non-traditional backgrounds, part of Harrington's new initiative. As he stood watching the construction, he heard, Footsteps behind him and turned to see Dr. Reed approaching, hard hat in place, clipboard in hand. "It's looking good," she said, surveying the progress. "Your walkway design is even more impressive in reality than on paper." Michael nodded, a sense of pride washing over him. "It's strange to see it actually being built, to know that something I thought of will be part of this building for decades. Get used to that feeling," she advised with a smile. "This is just the first of many." They stood in companionable silence for a moment, watching the workers. Then Dr. Reed spoke again, her tone more reflective. "Do you remember that night, when I asked if we could start right here?" "Of course," Michael replied. "How could I forget? It changed everything." She nodded slowly. "I had no idea where it would lead. I just knew you had something valuable to offer, something that was being wasted." "Why did you take that chance?" Michael asked, a question that had lingered in his mind for months. "Why me?" Dr. Reed was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, "My father was a maintenance worker at my university. Brilliant man, self-taught in mathematics. He used to help students who were struggling, tutoring them after hours while he cleaned the classrooms." Her voice softened with the memory. "No one ever gave him the chance to be more than that, to use his mind as well as his hands." Michael looked at her with new understanding. Her interest in him had never been charity or tokenism. It had been recognition, seeing in him what someone should have seen in her father. "Thank you," he said simply, "for seeing me." "You did the hard part," she replied. "You never stopped, believing you could be more. You never stopped learning, preparing, being ready for the opportunity when it came." As they turned to leave the construction site, Michael looked back once more at the building rising against the sky, a building that now carried a piece of him within it, a building that represented not just sustainable design principles, but a more sustainable approach to recognizing human potential wherever it appeared. What had begun with a simple question, "Do you think we could start right here?" had become something neither of them could have fully imagined that night. Not just a professional collaboration, but a transformation that was rippling outward, changing lives, challenging assumptions, opening doors that had long been closed. For Michael Williams, it was just the beginning. The path that had once seemed lost to him now stretched forward with possibility. And as he walked beside Dr. Reed toward the site office, he felt something he had almost forgotten how to feel during those years of emptying trash cans and mopping floors. Not just hope for what might be possible, but certainty that he was finally, truly, where he belonged.